this is a make or break moment for America. It's a make or break moment for people with disabilities. We know that people with disabilities are still struggling across the country. And every day I receive emails, I get phone calls, I get letters. And they're all from people with disabilities, their family members, their friends, and concerned citizens. And while the stories vary, they're different, there is one consistent theme through these types of letters, and that is we're struggling out here. We need our government to support us, to believe in us, to invest in us, and in the time of budget cuts and belt tightening, some believe that it is time to retreat, that it's time to take a step back, and that as a country, we don't need to invest in America. But I can tell you, for the Americans that I talk to, who need jobs, who need an education system that prepares them for the 21st century, who need transportation, who need health care, who need their government to provide the supports and services so that they can be productive members of our society. They need a fair shot and a level playing field. Retreat is not an option. Failing to invest in our future is no choice. Turning our back on the millions of Americans with disabilities who make up our future, that's not something that we're going to do. That's not who this president is. That's not who we are as an administration. And that is not what America is about. We are a country that passed the most comprehensive civil rights bill of this generation for people with disabilities. We are a country that believes that everyone should have a fair shot and play on that level playing field. And over the first 3 years of this president's administration, we've been striving to do just that. The president signed the most comprehensive executive order for the employment of persons with disability in our country's history to hire 100,000 persons with disabilities over the next 5 years. Our Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice issued new regulations under the ADA that had not been updated in almost 20 years. And whether it's our Department of Education saying that schools' use of technology must be accessible, or the FCC's implementation of the 21st Century Communication Act so that people with disabilities will have access to the technology of the future, or EEOC's work on the ADA Amendments Act so that everyone who has a right to be protected by the landmark ADA legislation is in fact being protected. We have been hard at work, working with Americans with disabilities, working with you all in this room and throughout California on securing that brighter future. But the truth is, this is really not about looking backwards. We are looking forward to a day when everybody can reach for America's promise. You heard the president talk about a few weeks ago in his State of the Union address, and one of the things he talked about was that we need to reclaim our values. We need to renew that sense of fair play. And I can't think of a community where these sentiments apply more than for our community, Americans with disabilities, because we know that if given a fair shot, we will excel, we will thrive, and we will be just as good as anybody else. You know, last week, some of you may all have watched that we had what we call the community leaders briefing over at the White House. And it's a chance where organizations ask us that they want to come in and have their leaders from around the country briefed about what we're doing in the administration. And the ARC was one of the organizations. We have some members who were there at that event. They came in, and 150 strong, and we gave them a briefing, and we talked to them about some of the things that we're doing. The president dropped by to say hello and say a few words. But you know, what was great about that is that some of the stories that came from that, and some of the individuals that the ARC wanted us to talk about and highlight. And one of those individuals was a young woman named Sarah Van Winkle. And Sarah's from Ohio, her family lives in Ohio. And she's a person with a disability. And the story that they told about Sarah, getting the supports and services so that she could get an education, graduate from school, and now is working in an integrated employment setting, and she's living independently. getting supports and services through Medicaid, living in her community alongside her peers. And that is really what this is about. That's what we're trying to accomplish. It's to help folks like Sarah and to support folks like Sarah. And there are millions more just like Sarah, just asking for their piece of the pie, for their fair shot. And during that same briefing, the president, I think, put it best when he said, are we a country that's going to leave folks like Sarah or myself or my colleagues up here on the panel like Richard, Janie, and Marcie? Are we a country that's going to leave those folks behind and not provide the supports and services that we need? That's not who we are as a country. I don't believe it, the president doesn't believe it, and we don't accept that. And a country as great as ours, as long as this president is in office, as he said last week at the ARC briefing, he's got our back. He's got Americans with disabilities back. So what does that mean moving forward? And the president just released his proposed FY13 2013 budget yesterday. Some of you all may have seen some of the highlights from that budget, but the budget shows a few things which I think connect to what the president was talking about in the State of the Union, about giving everybody a fair shot, investing in America, investing in people with disabilities. Even in tough economic times, the president continues our funding for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And we provide a $20 million increase, a 5% increase for the Part C program for infants and toddlers, because we know that when kids with disabilities get off to a great start, we're providing supports and services early on, they are much more likely to be successful. And when we get out of school, we need good jobs. So the budget provides $125 million for the Workforce Innovation Fund to support reform of the workforce system to help improve outcomes for people with disabilities. Vocational rehabilitation services also will contribute to this effort to ensure that programs are working together and finding results and innovative solutions for the best outcomes for people with significant disabilities. The budget also provides $24 million so that we can improve the capacity of one-stop centers so they're open and accessible for all people with disabilities to get the training, supports, and services they need to get back in the job field. The budget continues funding for the NITR program, the NITR program that invested in cloud computing so that we can continue to focus on making sure that people with disabilities are not left behind in the cloud computing revolution. And the budget also continues funding so that the Section 503 rules that we issued, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, that we're going to be able to provide the funding so that we can finalize those rules. And finally, once and for all, put in place strong goals so that federal contractors are hiring people with disabilities at a rate equivalent to, or using mechanisms and using goals that are consistent with the same types of goals that have been in place for years for women and other minorities. And because technology is the future, the budget continues funding for the FCC so that the FCC can continue its implementation of the 21st Century Communications Act. And the one thing, as I begin to close here, the one thing that I am probably most excited about in our budget, and if you look at the fact sheet, you see that one of the things we talk about is a government-wide review. And this process, this initiative that we're going to undertake as an administration really builds on, I think, what the community has been saying to us, but not only really to us, it's been saying long before this president took office, is that programs for people with disabilities need to be working together. They need to be coordinated. They need to be talking to each other. Whether you're Medicaid, or the Department of Transportation, or HHS, or FEMA and the Department of Transportation, or the Department of Labor and the Department of Education, these programs need to be talking to each other, need to be working together to have better outcomes for people with disabilities. Better outcomes, reduce costs, better efficiency, better results for people with disabilities. And so over the next several months, what we're going to do is the White House is going to be leading an effort to really do a government-wide review and identify issues and coordination issues and collaboration issues in places where we think as a federal government we can work better together. And based on that review that we're going to undertake as a government, we're going to be coming out with some recommendations on what we think are the next steps. And so I am excited about this because I think it has a chance to be one of a game changer for people with disabilities, and it has a chance to really reshape the landscape of how we think about programs serving people with disabilities. Not programs that are serving folks to keep them out of the employment arena or keep them on entitlement programs, but programs that are working better for people with disabilities, making them part of our society, bringing them into the community. And so we are very excited about that. And I think what it says about this president and this administration is that we simply are not going to rest. You're going to hear from my colleagues, and you're going to hear some things that we've done that have been good. And you've heard me talk about some of the things that are moving forward, but there's a lot more. But we simply are not satisfied. We're not done, we're not finished, we're not resting on any of our successes. We're moving forward to make lives better for people with disabilities, and we're doing it with people with disabilities. So we thank you all for coming out for the event today. We got a great program lined up, and the next speaker coming up next is my good friend and my colleague, Jannie Lara-Stein, who is Vice Chair of the Board for the National Council on Disability. So thank you very much. Please welcome Jan.
Among those in government who are dedicated to ensuring integration and full participation for Americans with disabilities, the NCD is unique in that disability policy is its focus. The NCD is composed of 15 presidential appointees. Our stories are and reflect America's stories. We are diverse geographically, by disability, by expertise, and by experience. We are Americans with disabilities, parents of disabled children, care and support providers, and we come from different backgrounds, ethnicities, and political parties that are united by the common goal of realizing the promises of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The NCD's work spans the broad spectrum of living, learning, and earning with disabilities in America. We understand that people with disabilities develop skills to cope with situations and environments that may be challenging, and that those skills need to be viewed as valued assets, not discounted as deficiencies, and that more opportunities to put these skills to use and better everyone in America need to be available. In programs and forums across the country hosted by the NCD during this past year, we heard many voices speaking concerns that focused on the issues that were addressed by the President in the State of the Union. On the subjects of independent living and self-determination, some of those topics included Medicaid and managed care, parenting rights, and digital inclusion. Some addressed issues that involve basic living identity, transitioning to tactile currency. In our reports, we were able to address some of those issues in the past few months. We have issued 2 reports that may be of interest. Kareem mentioned the importance of digital inclusion, and we were happy as NCD to highlight the progress that has occurred as a result of an increase in digital inclusion. In another report, we addressed the continuing need to provide supports and services for America's military families. And in collaboration, working agency with agency, we're very pleased to be in collaboration currently with FEMA to work to guarantee effective communication before, during, and after emergency situations. On learning, NCD is in dialogue with everyone from local school boards to the Department of Education on integration for students from preschool through post-secondary education and beyond. We are looking forward to a meeting at the end of March where experts and stakeholders will meet, come together, and help us develop a toolkit which will place education issues in a disability rights framework. And on earning, NCD is working hard to ensure that everyone, including America's disability community, is part of the President's vision for equal pay, meaningful employment, and the opportunity to benefit from a competitive growth economy. The incentive program that has been proposed to help veterans into employment is viewed by NCD as both necessary and a tremendous step forward in assisting us to welcome home, respect and honor our veterans, and at the same time work to revitalize our economy. NCD is privileged to work hand in hand with many of the federal agencies on these and other projects, and we would like to encourage your input and participation as well. So I invite you to visit us at ncd.gov on Facebook and on Twitter to learn more about what we are doing and to provide us with your input and allow us to learn from your experiences. I thank you very much for your time, and it is now my pleasure to turn the meeting over to Richard Devylder from the Department of Transportation for his update. Richard?
Just to give you a few things about what's going on with the U.S. Department of Transportation and kind of where our focus is. You know, obviously, without transportation, people don't go to school, don't go to work, can't take care of their health needs, and so forth. And so when I first started and was considering the position, they asked me what was my goal. And I said one thing: integration. That is what we are primarily focused on at the U.S. DOT. And just some areas that we have looked at and that we're working on is number one, infrastructure. As we looked at surveys and as we held community forums with the disability community leaders across the country, the one thing that came up continuously is that we would love to use public transportation, but we can't get to it. And that's an infrastructure issue. That's all the way from sidewalks and streets not being accessible to having issues with elevators and escalators and lifts and those sort of things. So one of the things that we've done is we have many different grant programs within US DOT in our different modes. And we have integrated into those grant programs accessibility. Now some would say, well, that's a given. Well, it's a given in a way, but what we want to make sure is that the budget has a focus in that area so that we ensure that we're addressing the issues step by step. We know it's going to take billions and billions of dollars to address it, but if we're doing it step by step and we're using, for instance, our state of good repair funding to ensure the state of good repair ensures accessibility is being addressed, that happens. And then the second thing, which I think we all can agree, is that the relationship between rail and the disability community has been somewhat contentious over the years. And we've developed a really good relationship with rail during our time in this administration. We have negotiated and worked very closely with Amtrak in terms of a couple things. One is, as they move forward to make rail stations accessible, we're ensuring that the funding is there for them, but also that there's a commitment to take it to a level higher than what's minimally required within regulations. And so that's anywhere from the station to the platforms to the communication systems. And you'll notice in the President's budget that there's proposed over several years $47 billion to address rail needs in terms of accessibility, but in the next year there's $6 billion allocated to specifically address rail station accessibility so that individuals can begin to use rail and that it's effective and accessible. I was just telling Kareem on my way here this morning, we actually just finished an agreement, and it's guidance that we have put out in terms of working with the railroad folks to ensure that the next generation rail cars are accessible. Because that's one of the issues that we've been addressing significantly, is that rail cars seem to last longer than all of us. And they seem to regurgitate over and over and over. But we're in a process now in this country where we're beginning to buy new rail cars. California and Illinois, over the next couple of years, are going to be purchasing 135 new rail cars. And so we wanted to make sure that we put out guidance, and guidance means do it to the rail world in terms of what we want. So we sat on the phone this morning and finalized with the states and with the department to ensure that we're doing a couple things. One, we're increasing the capacity of lifts, so they're no longer being limited to 600 pounds, but we want it to be 800 pounds or greater for individuals to be able to get on rail cars, which is the direction we have gone with fixed route buses and so forth. Number two, we are expanding the width when you get into the train car so that you can actually turn your wheelchair when you get onto the car, and ensure that you're able to actually place your wheelchair into the slot comfortably. And then the second part of this whole thing is we're ensuring that there's going to be dual mode communications on the train cars. And we're working out the final specifications in terms of dual mode communications. But what we have made very clear is people who are deaf or hard of hearing, people who are blind or have low vision, have got to be receiving the same communications everyone else is on the train cars. And so I'm pleased that we were able to finally work through all that in the last month and finalize the deal this morning to move forward. And the states of California and Illinois have assured us that they are moving forward in that direction with the new rail car purchases that they're going to be making. And then we have some other things going on in terms of air, ensuring that we have communications that's accessible for air travel in airports, to ensure that the communications and also the airports are more accessible, including also making sure that there are service animal relief areas. For some, they say that's not a big deal, but for others who have service animals, that is an absolutely huge deal. When you have to go outside of security for your service animal to relieve themselves between flights, that is not realistic for you to be able to switch flights in a timely manner. And so those are areas that we have been working on as an administration and as the U.S. Department of Transportation to ensure that we are focusing really on integration in transportation. So now I'm going to turn this over to Marcie Roth, who's the Director of the Office on Disability Integration and Coordination with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Marcie.
As special, as people who are considered vulnerable. We've looked at people with disabilities as being liabilities in emergencies and disasters, and we're no longer doing that. At FEMA, we plan for the whole community, and that means we engage the whole community. FEMA's mission is to support our citizens and first responders to ensure that as a nation we work together to build, sustain, and improve our capacity to prepare for, protect against, respond to, recover from, and mitigate all hazards. President Obama, within the last year, issued Presidential Policy Directive Number 8, which is a secure and resilient nation with the capabilities required across the whole community to prevent, protect against, mitigate, respond to, and recover from the threats and hazards that pose the greatest risk. Under the leadership of Administrator Fugate, and in the work that we're doing at FEMA and across the federal government, is engaging with the real whole community, not the people who take care of people with disabilities, not the people who speak for people with disabilities, but engaging all of us. And we're doing a variety of things so that we are not just talking about how we are going to do this, but that we're actually engaging on a daily basis in real-time partnership, real-time activity that is really bringing people with disabilities to the table as full and meaningful participants and partners. And this requires that folks get involved. So what we've done at FEMA has been to bring on board disability integration specialists. We have folks in each of the 10 regions across the country who work with their local communities in preparing for emergencies and disasters, and then as well during response and during recovery when need be, to make sure that we're addressing the physical, programmatic, and communication access needs of the whole community. So we're not just talking about people with disabilities, we're talking about people who also have access and functional needs. Seniors who may not identify as a person with a disability. Children and families, people with limited English proficiency. When we plan for the whole community, everybody benefits. We leave no one behind. And the commitment that this administration has made to the disability community is very, very clear in the work that we're being supported in doing, whether it's through Presidential Policy Directive 8 or any of the work that we're doing across the country in making sure that not just preparing for the whole community, but in fact preparing with the whole community. And so this means that when we think about alerts and warnings, our integrated public alerts and warning system is bringing folks with disabilities to the table, bringing folks who have technology knowledge to the table as our partners in planning, making sure that we're thinking about how we're going to best be able to warn people, how we're going to best be able to notify people when they need to get out of harm's way. Thinking about how we're going to provide sheltering services so that people can stay with their family, with their friends, in the community, being able to stay out of the acute healthcare system, and being able to maintain individual health and safety and independence. And this is the work that we're doing every day at FEMA in support of an administration that is committed to the full inclusion of people with disabilities. We're very excited about the involvement that we're seeing across the country from folks, just like the folks who are here in this room, who are wanting to be our partners. On January 4th, Administrator Fugate was appointed by Secretary Napolitano as the chair of the Interagency Coordinating Council on Emergency Preparedness and Individuals with Disabilities. This is an interagency coordinating council that brings together 25 federal agencies working to make sure that in all aspects of all of our work that we're working together in partnership seamlessly, so that when we engage the community, that we're doing so in a way that is fully inclusive, both at the federal level and then as we work with folks across the states and public and private, faith-based and in virtually all aspects, making sure that our tribal nations are actively involved and true and meaningful partners. We're serious about this. We are truly committed to disability inclusive emergency management at every level, and the commitment of this administration to be able to plan with and for people with disabilities is going to make a very big difference in the actual daily lives of many, many people. We can't prevent emergencies and disasters, but we sure can do a much better job of making sure that everybody has a good opportunity to be able to maintain their health, their safety, and their independence in what are often some of the darkest days for all of us. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all and to have a chance to talk a little bit about what we're doing. I think we're going to have a chance for some more questions and answers in a few minutes. But before that, I have the great pleasure to introduce a dear friend of mine who I don't get to see nearly enough, but we do find ourselves periodically at tables together. I'm sure Robert David Hall does not need much of an introduction from me. I'm sure you all know who David is and the incredible work that he's done. I just want to point out that each of us in this room plays a role in making sure that the whole community is considered. One of the very important roles that I don't think we celebrate enough is the role of those folks who get out in front of the camera and demonstrate that there are no barriers and that employment across the range of what anyone's passions might be are possible for people with disabilities. And David, you've been a true leader, not only for yourself, but for many, many people with disabilities. And
thank you.
Thrilled to be here with you, so thank you.
Cool.
It's always an honor to be asked to participate in events like this, and I want to thank Kareem Dale for including me. I first met Kareem 4 years ago in Columbus, Ohio, and I've been asked to help moderate a supposed debate between the candidates on disability issues. Neither candidate actually showed up, but their representatives assured us that we disabled people were key players in their election plans, and our concerns were of critical importance. So I always feel like a child in these meetings, you know, like Department of Transportation. when I grew up, the adults ate Thanksgiving upstairs and the kids went to the cellar. And I've always felt like, oh, it's Mom now. Why am I not in the cellar? But I am not a policy expert or even a disability expert. I don't want to be third undersecretary of anything in anyone's administration. But I am glad I have a president who's proud to represent America's huge disabled population and is committed to understanding our needs and acting on them. No excuses, just results. That's what most of us want, especially in the areas of community living, healthcare, and employment. And I also believe the invisibility of people with disabilities in the arts and media is a direct and powerful reason why the disability civil rights movement seems at times to take a step forward and then 2 steps back. Please don't confuse what I say as disrespect for any of you. Activists, advocates, organizers, academics, business professionals, political leaders, parents, students, support staff, your work, our work, is critical and extremely important. You guys do the heavy lifting. But I'd like to point out the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Why do major political candidates feel the need to speak personally to groups like, the National Rifle Association, the NAACP, La Raza, ARP, and feel less inclined to mix it up and press the flesh with us? Just wondering out loud. And, I told Kareem that I wasn't happy that I didn't hear the words people with disabilities in the State of the Union address. And I think I have a good enough relationship with Kareem that I can dig a little bit and he'll come right back at me. And he's, I'm well aware that Republicans in your own constituents put a lot of pressure on you, but I remain hopeful. I'd like to think I'm here not as an actor, but as a citizen, an American citizen with a disability. It took me a few years after my accident 24 years ago to even think of myself as a person with a disability, but I do today. That a television coroner would even be invited to an event like this makes me very happy. So I'm happy to be here, but Kareem, I'm not entirely happy with President Obama's State of the Union speech. Again, please don't misunderstand me. I really applaud the administration's accomplishments, the withdrawal of troops from Iraq and soon Afghanistan, the commitment to health care, and the overriding struggle to create jobs and get this country prepared for the future. Many of these policies will affect people with disabilities, and I do understand that the president has a lot of pressure. Still, I just didn't hear a specific mention of us, the largest minority in America, people with disabilities. In his address, the president challenged business leaders to ask yourselves what you can do to bring jobs back to your country. And your country, he promised, will do everything we can to help you succeed. I am not a cynic, I'm more of a skeptic, I suppose, but I would have enjoyed hearing the president mention 1 or 2 things that directly impact people with disabilities. Secretary Solis in the U.S. Labor Department, for example, proposing changes to the process of awarding government contracts that raise the standard of accountability that each business will have to bear with respect to recruiting people with disabilities. If it's approved, it'll ask companies receiving government contracts to strive, another great verb, to have 7% of their workforce be comprised of people with disabilities. That's important stuff. This is the smartest president we've had in a long time, and he just can't say everything, but I'm just telling you how I feel. Sometimes I feel, and I have for years, that you're all doing such adult, brave, difficult, tedious, day-to-day difficult work that, all I'm trying to do, whoopee-doo, is get a role on a movie or a TV show. But I have to tell you, images and stories that we tell make your work either tougher or easier. And I am so committed to the images and the stories, including people with disabilities, actors, writers, producers, people behind the scenes. If we see people with disabilities portraying strong, meaningful, interesting characters on our television screens, in motion pictures, in broadcasting, in advertising, there will be, and there has been, a positive result. So I, of course, agonize over these little moments and have written 150 pages, and I'm going to stop right there because the Q&A is most important, but I really appreciate, I see some friends in the audience, Ray Bradford from one of my unions who is just a devoted disability activist, Olivia Rayner from UCLA, and I've learned so much from those of you who are in the infantry of this particular thing. So thanks again, and nice to meet new people.
I think the most important part of what we're going to do today is to have dialogue with you all. So we've got a bunch of experts up here from NCD, FEMA, Department of Transportation, David, maybe you can get us all a job in acting.
Absolutely. No problem.
Trying to make that happen.
We need bodies.
So, let's open it up for question and answer. Dialogue.
So it's nice to see some old friends and new friends here. And I wanted to ask Marcie and Richard a couple questions, if possible, about emergency preparedness and about transportation issues. So Marcie, what about the Red Cross? FEMA's doing a great job planning, but there's no authority with the Red Cross. What's the Red Cross doing to make shelters accessible and accommodate people with medical conditions in the event of an emergency? So that's one question. And then for Richard, I'm really concerned about paratransit. I know you're very concerned about rail travel and other things like that, but on the day-to-day, the paratransit issue, especially when in a place like LA County and the city of LA where we have lawsuits going about emergency preparedness, and we have lawsuits about the lack of sidewalk repair and curb ramps and things like that, where people are in the street trying to get to the bus. So I'm very concerned about paratransit and eligibility criteria to weed people off of paratransit, but not giving them a fixed route alternative. So my two questions, thank you.
And let me just say, let Marcie and Richard, but just to be clear, we certainly are open to taking questions on all sorts of issues, employment, healthcare, education. So feel free to ask questions about all of them. So turn it over to Marcie and Richard.
Thank you, and I appreciate the question. I can tell you what FEMA is doing. FEMA has no enforcement authority. That's not what we do. What we do is we provide support to states, and we provide guidance to assist in meeting the needs of the whole community. About a year ago, we published guidance on providing general population sheltering for the whole community. We've been working around the country with the American Red Cross and many other partners to identify and then address a number of issues that make it possible for local communities to be able to provide sheltering for people with disabilities in the general population environment. We do a lot of training. Our disability integration specialists and our team at headquarters have done several hundred trainings over the last year. And sometimes we train alongside the American Red Cross, other shelter partners, and most importantly, engaging the whole community as partners in everything that we're doing, so that when disaster does in fact strike, that's not when people are first working together. And so that means bringing folks to the table well in advance and looking at ways that we can address what a particular community's challenges might be to meeting the needs of the folks in their community.
Thank you. Nice to see you. Just a couple things. Obviously we're concerned too. I know I spoke primarily about the integration piece of it, but obviously there are a group of individuals that are dependent on paratransit services to get around the community. And so it is a concern of ours, and in terms of eligibility, I know that a lot of questions and issues have come up over my time at DOT around eligibility and the consistency. I think it's probably one of the things that you're talking about in terms of the consistency of eligibility across communities and across the country. And the other piece of it I have to say to you, which has actually been energizing, is a lot of the things that we're getting from the community is, we're tired of being told that we can just take paratransit, and we really want you to focus more around making the community accessible so that we're not a burden on paratransit, and those that can use it can actually have it available to them. So I'm more than obviously willing to have a conversation with you some more. I have had conversations across the country with different paratransit providers around the issues, and I do look at the complaints, things that come into DOT to see if there are patterns and so forth that are happening to get a better understanding of what's happening. And obviously I did serve on the board of directors for LA County's paratransit for I think almost 5 years. Shelley's here, she can probably remind me, 20 years ago. So I do have an understanding of how all that stuff works.
Back here.
Hello, I'm sorry. Hello. My name is Betty Wilson, and I'm with the Commission on Disability, City of Los Angeles. And as Paula had just mentioned, yes, our city is being sued because of not being in compliance with our laws. One of the things that I'm very concerned about, several things of course, is the fact that the budget cuts have, as usual, affected people with disabilities and those who are most vulnerable. My concern would be that in looking at any future budget adjustments, that our federal government as well as our state governments and the rest of our, where we can have funding, that we don't cut the budget to the extent that we have compromised the quality and the continuum of care, if you want to call it that. We look at mental health, rehabilitation, housing, and the need for accessible, affordable housing and transportation. These are the services that are both government agencies run as well as the community-based agencies are concerned with. I am concerned that we're not looking at these issues as closely as we should be. And I want to make sure that this administration or any other administration in Los Angeles looks at Los Angeles too, because of our peculiar geographic configuration. Here you are in Long Beach, and here I am in the city of LA. I just ran across the border, It's like we are all affected anytime we're all together in the same area. So that is my biggest concern, that we stop cutting our budgets. Those agencies and entities that are local government agencies or state government agencies or community-based that do provide services and assist in education, transportation, health services, mental and physical health services, and rehabilitation. Those are some of my concerns. I'd like to know if anyone has any ideas or has any concept on what we're going to do about this in the near future, because I don't see the picture getting much better in terms of disability issues of the critical life support services, housing, education, transportation, and so forth. So I'd like to hear more of how that's going to be effective.
Thank you for the question, Betty. So let me take a crack at that. My colleagues can certainly address that if they would like. Listen, as I said in my remarks, I think that we know, and I think sometimes people think that come from the White House, we work in the White House, we work in the federal government agencies, sometimes we're disconnected. And maybe to some extent that's true, but as I tell people every time they say that, as I said in my remarks, I get the letters, I get the emails, I get the calls. And so we know that folks are out here struggling on a day-to-day basis. There are barriers in place. Cities and states and towns are facing budget crises, making cuts. So I think that we get it. I know that the president gets it. When I was last week's ARC event. I was walking over to the event with him. He said, Kareem, how do you think we're doing on disability? And I said, I think we're doing pretty good, Mr. President. We got to keep at it. He said, you're absolutely right. He said, we really gotta stay at it. And he said, advocates are going to keep on pushing us. And he said, we got to keep going. And so I think that is our framework. And to address some of your specific issues, what we're trying to do is at the federal level, we're trying to, obviously we can't control cities and states' budgets or the cuts that they make. But what we're trying to do is say in the federal government that the president is making choices that really focus on his priorities and focus on the priorities that we think are important. So you mentioned education and rehabilitation. I think what you saw in our budget yesterday is that we proposed no cuts to voc rehab services. So through RSA, we did not propose any cuts. We didn't propose any cuts to the independent living program. And so our funding continues with no cuts for that program. What you saw in the housing program is that we actually moved for and proposed an increase for the 811 program, for housing vouchers for non-elderly persons with disabilities to increase affordable, accessible housing. So in that budget environment, we're expanding key housing programs to support the signing of the Frank Melville housing bill that the president signed last year. So on the housing front, we're continuing to make key investments in those areas. And listen, I know that all of that funding, even the increase, there's more we need to do. I think we get that, but we are not making cuts in those areas. As I talked about in education, we're making increases in Part C program and investing more money. So housing, education, rehabilitation, employment, the key things that are part of the president's agenda, and then innovation and research, we're making increased investments in the key research programs for folks with disabilities and in those other areas. So we're trying to set an example that if you're going to make tough cuts, we're not going to do it on the backs of people with disabilities. And that's what the president said at his ARC event, is that we are not going to say that people with disabilities have to get more cuts and the deficit negotiations, the deficit needs to be balanced on the backs of people with disabilities. That's just not what we're going to do. We need to make sure that we're doing a fair and balanced approach. That doesn't mean that some disability programs aren't going to get cut. We certainly did propose some cuts to disability programs. They're tough choices. They're not choices that the president wants to make, but they're choices that we have to make. And here's the idea, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues for any additional comments. If we don't have a balanced budget, if we don't get our fiscal house in order, we are not going to be able to continue the investments in things like voc rehab and things like emergency preparedness or accessible transportation. If we don't get that fiscal house in order, it's going to be harder. Their cuts are going to be deeper later on. So we need to get that in order now so that administrations and future administrations can make the investments in the programs that we all know are critical. But we're not gutting programs to do that. We're making smart, but sometimes very tough choices. But in the areas you mentioned, we're making increased investments. So does anybody want to add anything to that?
Yeah, one of the things that I'd say, and Kareem talked about in his opening remarks about federal agencies working more closely together on some of the programmatic and services issues. And obviously one of the reasons is budgetary concerns that we all have. And one of the things that we've tried to do with our federal partners, and we actually have an interagency group between several federal agencies with the U.S. Department of Transportation around transportation programs and services. Because sometimes these programs and services get siloed, and they're not necessarily coordinating and cross-working with each other and providing services. So one of the things we've tried to do in working with state and local governments is, number one, show them that they can do some cross-work together, whether it's between programs that are being funded through the Health and Human Services Program versus the U.S. Department of Transportation, to try to make programs more accessible to individuals in the community. And we're continuing that dialogue, and as Kareem said, we're going to be doing more of that over the next few months at a federal level to talk about what needs to happen. And where we've asked state and local governments to look at their planning is through their planning organizations, in terms of looking at the different programs and services around transportation that's available in their areas, and how could they better coordinate and maybe cross in terms of services to share rides and share services that individuals may need. So it may be a senior program, but the funding may not only be specific for seniors to be able to use that service. Others may be able to use that service within their city or their county. And those are the kind of things that we're asking for folks to look at.
Some of the ways that we can all work together to make sure that we're investing well, and I think about this in the emergency management context, when people are able to participate in their own personal preparedness, in their family's preparedness, when they're active in their neighborhood and are able to participate in preparedness, people stay out of medical facilities, they stay out of acute care settings, leaving those settings for folks who bona fidely need acute medical care. When we plan together and we address how we're going to make sure that everybody gets alerted so that they can participate in their own safety. When we work together to make sure that when people are going to require new accessible housing, that we don't instead send people to nursing homes because we can't meet their housing needs. When we do these kinds of things, we keep people out of the long-term care system unnecessarily. People are able to continue to be part of their family, part of their neighborhood, part of their community, get back to work along with everybody else. Recently in Joplin, Missouri, after the tornadoes, one of our many victories in assisting the people of Joplin to get back on with their lives was making sure that kids with disabilities went back to school at the same time everybody else went back to school. Historically, that's not happened. Historically, if you had an IEP, you might not have gone back to school with everybody else. Well, not only is that a problem for that child, and it's a huge problem for that child, but then that child's parents can't go back to work when everybody else goes back to work. They can't get on with their life the same way that everybody else is getting on with their life. So some of this stuff is a little more subtle, but when we do this well, the whole community benefits. This isn't just keeping people out of hospitals or nursing homes or getting kids back to school and benefiting those individuals. That maximizes, optimizes that community's very limited precious resources at a time when it needs to be maximizing and optimizing them to the best of their ability. So some of this stuff, as we continue to do our work and as we all work together, some of this stuff is a little harder to articulate. It's a little harder to kind of do the math with the general public about this. But this is smart practice. When our transportation systems are back online and everybody can use them after a disaster. When we do these things well, everybody benefits and we really do optimize limited resources.
I want to just add a couple quick things. Hey, Betty. Betty Wilson was one of the first people in the disability community I met when I was a disc jockey 25 years ago. And I share her concern. We all have stories, but I have a brother who is blind, who has 3 wonderful kids, one of whom is precocious, and 2 are 11-year-old boys way out there on the autism spectrum. And I watch my brother, who's a bright fellow, fight fiercely. And despite all of the legitimate accomplishments that you have to quote Kareem and that we all have to look to, the perception is quite often, oh my God, their budget cuts are here, and those least able to defend themselves are going to be the ones hit with the biggest cuts. So that's even a bigger part of the problem than listing off the accomplishments, because it's a tough sell, and we have to. I'm afraid we have to prioritize. No, I'm not afraid. I know we have to prioritize, but we have to deal with the perception, and that gets back to what I was jabbering about with images and stories.
I'd like to make a comment. Yeah. I'm Patricia Bath, President of the American Institute for Prevention of Blindness, and I'd like to have us talk and think about digital accessibility. The disabled can be empowered and can be more active, when they are digitally competent. Now, I know this is a poor economic time to talk about ramping up the assets that we provide to the disabled. However, that's exactly what we need to do so that they don't fall back. And in this regard, we need to think about the children and the educational needs, especially of the blind children. They need computers. They need computers that are configured for accessibility. Many times they have computers that have been provided but not updated. Their computers need to be updated with software, because I'm sure most of you have either a PC or a Mac, and as we know, almost every year, every other year, you have to update. How are the school systems coming up with the funding to ensure that our children, our future have the assets they need to achieve their personal best?
Thank you for the question, Pat. And let me try to address Pat's question and connect it to something that the topic we just discussed with David and Betty. And I think sometimes, you know, what I struggle with is, you know, when I'm talking to folks, I'm not listing accomplishments for the sake of listing accomplishments. I think what we're trying to do is say, here's what we have done that can help people with disabilities every day on the ground. And I think that sometimes it's our issue as a government that we're not making those connections for people. And I think Pat's question raises that exact point, right? So, for example, Pat raises a question about computers in schools for kids and making sure that those computers are provided, and if they're provided, that they are accessible for kids with disabilities. So let me connect that to something that the Department of Education and the Department of Justice has done so that people understand it. And the purpose isn't to list an accomplishment, to pat us on the back, but it's to say, here's a tool that you can use when you're talking to local and state school districts right here in LA or anywhere in the country. We issued a guidance document and an FAQ document that said, in no uncertain terms, we did this in May 2011, that said in no uncertain terms, any technology that a school uses must be accessible for kids with disabilities. So if there is a computer or if there are other technologies that a school is using in that school system, it must be accessible. There must be an accessible alternative for kids with disabilities, and those must be accessible. So if you're looking at a school district or a school that is providing a computer or another form of technology and it is not accessible, then you have a tool, which is our document, our guidance document from the Department of Education, Department of Justice, to take to that school and say, well, here's what the federal government says you have to be doing because you are receiving federal funds. And so that's not us patting ourselves on the back because of an accomplishment. Rather, it's here's a tool for you all to use that can help you in your everyday endeavors in this particular situation, dealing with accessible electronic equipment for schools for kids with disabilities. And so that's an answer directly to your question, but I think when we talk about the things that we're doing, we're hopefully providing resources that folks can utilize in making improvements. I don't know if Janie wanted to address something on the technology question as well, but.
Okay, thank you. You know, I'm glad you brought up the technology question because, sorry. The technology question allows us to operate on a lot of different levels, and it reaches something that David spoke about and Marcie, and it also addresses the nuts and bolts of how we get by as people with disabilities and what we are seeking to provide for the next generation that's coming behind us. In terms of digital inclusion, we think about social media. Social media is probably the most powerful tool and is helping to define and redefine our culture every single day. And And so if you look at the work that has occurred, the research, and particularly the research NCD did across a number of different organizations and with a lot of input from experts, one of the things that we are calling for is a technology bill of rights. And that means that what we want to achieve, and I don't mean in our next lifetime, but in this digital lifetime, so that's in about the next 30 nanoseconds, the means by which everybody, regardless of their disability, has equal access to digital media, social media, video media, that draws in the federal communications aspect and the work that they did with the bill that was passed, the CBAA, recently. It includes theater and entertainment and the work that's being done to make sure that there's closed captioning available and video description added. But on a much more fundamental level, as far as I'm concerned, and what I think I heard from you, was how is this going to really impact people who are being educated and the students that are coming through the school systems now. There's an independent federal advisory group that just concluded with a series of findings on assistive technology and the ways to make that widely accessible. And I think those are being disseminated now and are going to be examined. Hopefully there will be movement from that sector. If you take a look at the digital inclusion report that we did, there's a huge series of recommendations and findings to be spread among the different levels in the Department of Education down to the school districts. And in addition, we're fortunate.
Thank you so much for that comment. And I want to tell you that I'll be one of the first signatories on the Bill of Rights. And I think it's important to have a mindset that where the disabled are concerned, these are not luxuries to have digital accessibility. These are necessities.
I agree, and I was not implying that all you did was pat yourself on the back, Kareem. I am thrilled that the digital revolution has, in fact, helped level the playing field. And Jenny's right that it's moving faster than anybody of my age can comprehend. I want to see social media, Twitter, Facebook, etc., do something that Dr. Rayner and I were talking about before this meeting, which is to make this a leaner, meaner machine. The things we want, we're trying to do with less money, but greater awareness and faster communication. And to your point, you can't be left out of the loop in terms of computer use or whatever it is day after tomorrow. So it's
I do want to do a little back patting, if I might. It would be very tempting in the aftermath of the disaster to kind of not necessarily prioritize access to information for people with disabilities in a disaster recovery center. And I think historically there has been some not such great access for people to have information. We have prioritized providing information in accessible formats, and we have kits. We pre-position those when we know there's going to be a hurricane, for example. We have the ability to move kits around the country very quickly so that in every disaster recovery center, people who are blind can get information on an accessible computer. People who are deaf or hard of hearing can have access to interpreters. We're working on ways, even if roads are down, that we can get folks to provide interpreters, cart services, materials in large print, materials in Braille, equipment that makes it possible for people to be able to apply for services and to get the kinds of assistance that they need. So not just in daily life, but also in times of disasters, we need to make sure that everyone can fully participate. And so I appreciate your comments about providing accessible, digital accessibility.
Terry Hartman-Squire, INSEF Communications and co-chair of the National Disability Leadership Alliance Employment Team. And I just want to thank you, Kareem. I don't think it's about a list of accomplishments so much as the dynamic underneath that. And since you took that post, you have opened up your office to monthly calls with administration officials, invited constituents into the White House over and over and over again, and coordinated a lot of the effort. The NCD and the National Council on Disability is really the true north of the disability rights movement, because you're an independent federal agency, no matter who occupies the corner office at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So, and Richard, you keep us moving on trains, planes, and automobiles. And David, please don't ever underestimate the power of the media, because you have provided incredible tailwinds for all of us to come up against centuries of lowered expectations. Marcie, I pulled off the internet this morning the 2012 State of FEMA. And I have to tell you, it's not just the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination, but embedded in this document is really the idea of true integration. It's not just a footnote. It's not just talking about the 10 regional specialists. It's about the whole community. Embedded in this in photographs of evacuations with people using wheelchairs. It talks about a national advisory committee with June Kales and Mary Tripp, and it's really exactly where we should be going in the private sector and in the public sector. I mean, we have champions, but within the pages of this, I want to thank you, because you have really made sure that no matter what happens in this country at a time of disaster, which we know is going to happen, things are going to be fully integrated, and I appreciate that. So my question is, what can we, no, I'm getting there, what can we do for you? And you guys may not know, but you've got incredible power in this room, and we want to be able to help you, because life's about a partnership and carrying each other's puzzle pieces. So aside from Betty and Richard that are at the mayor's office, Richard co-chairs the FCC Advisory Committee on Emergenciness, Olivia Rayner does critical research, Anita Wright and I've known each other 30 years. They're dealing with employment. Nancy Link Ellis is on the board of the World Institute on Disability and started Caption Fish and involved in HLAA. Teresa, and I'm sorry, I'm going to mess up your last name, but she is with the California Foundation on Independent Living and launched YO! Disabled and Proud and helping our youth. Ray Bradford is with AFTRA and helped us in terms of Resolution 18, which gives disability a voice and a face in not only organized labor. So we have, and Juan, as far as we have. So what can we do with you and for you to move this forward?
The person who started Caption Fish, can you have them start announcing, putting on there when audio description movies are available? Just a personal thing.
Hi, this is Nancy Link Ellis, and I started the Caption Movie program in 1993. And obviously since then it has grown, and I'm now with Caption Fish, and no, we don't have the funding to be able to do the described video. But what I want to address now is the HDMI cable problem.
Right.
So,
can we answer Terry's question first, and then we'll come back to your question, Nancy? I want to make sure we answer Terry's question, then we'll get your question. Because I think it's important what Terry said. You know, what can people do to get involved? And my big thing is that it does us no good up here if you all don't know what we're doing, so that you can utilize that information in your communities, right? And so the thing that I would say is get involved. And if you're not on my distribution list, I know a lot of people in here are, but there are probably some who are not, you should be on our distribution list, because everything we're talking about comes down through that distribution list. Read the information and say, oh wow, here's something I can use. You know, let me give you a perfect example. Project Civic Access is something we do, the Department of Justice does. In particular cities, they get settlements against cities to make sure they're accessible. You may know somebody in one of those cities, they should read that and forward it along. So I think the biggest thing you all can do is sign up so that you're getting the information, and I thank Terry for pulling that document off of FEMA's website, because that's how you can make differences, is know what we're doing and utilize that in your community. So to get on my distribution list, you can go to whitehouse.gov, click on disabilities, fill out the contact form, or you can simply email us at disability@who.eop.gov. Again, that's just the word disability at who.eop.gov. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything else to that. Okay. Go ahead, Nancy.
Janice does.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. I just want to add to that in terms of, what we've said before. The other piece of that, and Kareem has already said this, but to check in with these .gov sites. The information is there. We are very anxious to hear feedback on the recommendations that are made, on the programs that are proposed, on the things that are really in process right now. So don't wait. Go to all of us. See all of our sites, respond to the questions that are put out there, and let us know what you think. And that will allow us then to engage in the dialogue that will come back. And I know it feels very far sometimes to be in California from DC, but DC is in California. I'm one of the people that can testify to that. And there is no doubt that there is a very strong desire to spread this right across the country, and your help would be so appreciated.
You know what? We're going to take a couple more questions, but I just want to introduce a special guest who wants to say a few words. It just goes to show whenever you come to a disability event, you never know. He's walking up the stairs. Okay, you never know who's going to show up. At the ARC event last week, the ARC event, the president's visit was a surprise, and nobody. Is he here today? Nope. No. Did you go through any magnetometers?
Isn't he going to be in Newport Beach on Thursday?
If he did not go to any magnetometers, he's probably not here. So we don't have the president, but we have another good friend of mine who is a great supporter and was the UN ambassador of peace. And his issue focus was people with disabilities, and he's somebody that I've gotten to know over the last few years and has joined the fight for people with disabilities. Most people know him for his great singing, but I think he's become a friend to the disability community, and I think he wanted to say just a couple of words. So I will turn it over to Mr. Stevie Wonder.
He's almost here. He's almost here. He's coming up the stairs.
Boy, Kareem, you throw a nice party.
Operable implementation. So for instance, if you try to take a Samsung television set and plug in a Sony player, a Blu-ray player, you will not get captions. So the real issue here is to begin another driving force within SIMD to get this digital standards that have to do with broadcast and online and streaming and videos. We need an engine inside to drive this the way it was driven with digital cinemas, with the studios in the movie theaters, exhibition. So what can I do that can start getting this, motion? And every time I speak to somebody, they all have a different television set, and they all have a different cable provider, and they all have a different DVR system. And not one person has figured out how to get captions.
Can I add to your question by asking my chief technologist, Louis Herrera, who's on the FCC impact committee, to speak to that? Louis?
Well,
I know he has the answer.
No, there's no real answer, but there is coming. There is a real answer.
Excuse me, could we hand the microphone over to the speaker, please? Thank you.
Thank you. To tell you that there's a magic pill and there's a magic solution, okay, at this point, the technology does exist. We have new technology out there, and there's new things coming. At the 21st Century Communications Committee that I'm part of, we've discussed this, we've been in very serious discussions, and we are getting the cooperation. I can tell you that last week's meeting had me very impressed with the direction. The FCC is serious about making sure that we are getting this type of coverage. There are some issues with some of this stuff that you're bringing up regarding HDMI and captioning and everything else, but wait and see, because this is something that is being addressed, this is something that is taken very serious, and the technology has to be implemented, and the industry is looking at seeing how they can make this happen for all of us. To give you an answer right now, I would be speculating, and I'm not going to do that. But I can tell you that the wheels are in motion to make it happen.
Thank you, Louis. And you should follow up with me. We're happy to sit down. I mean, you're way beyond my technical expertise at that point, but I think we can certainly get you with the right people who can start to talk about those issues so we can understand them better.
I just want to add one thing to that.
I think you need a microphone.
It's all well and good for the FCC to do it, but the people who need to drive it are the manufacturers and the engineers who create it. We had a digital cinema accessibility demonstration last year, and what they did was they took the same film clip, and Sony played it, Do Re Mi played it, US Link played it, Rear Window played it, so that people could see whether it worked or not. And at that point, there was one company, Do Re Mi, that was proprietary, that was not going to play anybody else. So since then, they had to create something so that there's an open architecture. And personally, and I've been on the FCC advisory board, I don't believe that they have the teeth to do it. I think this is something that has to come within the industry, the broadcast and new media industry, that we need to get somebody in there who talks their language in order to get them to do it.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Coach. We have another question?
Yeah, there's 3 hands there.
Oh.
Thank you. Vanessa Pavuzzi from the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers. One of the key issues that centers have experienced and prioritized both themselves and the community of people with disabilities is the issues around housing, and specifically how that intersects with our ability to get people out of nursing homes and back into the community. And we certainly saw that CMS put out a funding opportunity to support some coordinated thinking and integration of housing and community development agencies and healthcare agencies, and we would really love to see that sort of thinking around connecting housing and transition services to play out more. California applied but did not receive that funding, but it certainly was the first time that we could get Department of Healthcare Services and our housing and community development agencies to even talk to each other about how to get people out of nursing facilities and keep them out in our community where they belong.
Thank you for the question.
Also, one more question. How can we be a part of your statewide, your system-wide review of disability programs? How will the community get to play a part in that?
Well, you can be assured that the community will get a chance to play a part in that, and you will be receiving details about how we're going to be, how we'll be setting that up and what will happen specifically with that. So guess what? You need to be on my distribution list. Okay, so you'll be hearing about how we go about that and how we set that up and how we roll that out. But that government-wide review it's exactly those types of issues that we're going to be looking at. Is how on the federal level should CMS be talking to HUD, and should CMS and HUD be working with HHS on those types of services? Because if you're getting out of a nursing home or an institution and then you don't have the health care or the services you need to get a job, then it doesn't do you any good, or you're not going to be productive when you get out of those nursing homes. So those are exactly some of the issues that we're going to be looking at about implementation of those types of programs and what can we do to improve that.
All right, Kareem, Steve is here. Stevie Wonder is here.
Mr. Stevie Wonder.
Well, first of all, I'm very honored to be here, to have the honor of seeing my friend again, Kareem, and being with all of you. This is an amazing week, as you can imagine. As you know, a lot of things have happened in these last few weeks. Interestingly, I was last Saturday, flying from Chicago for a memorial service, and while I was on the plane, I was working on a lyric to this song called "You're Doing Something," and the song is a very inspirational song. It's a very kind of high energy song. It really speaks on how no one should be able to stop you from being motivated or making you feel that what your dream is and your goals are impossible. And if there are such people or there is such person in your life that has nothing to say to you but what you can do and what can happen, then they need to be either dismissed from your space. Clearly, we all know people that don't believe, but thank goodness there are so many people that do believe, and that's what keeps us moving forward. I mention that because then I land and I get this text saying that I'm sure you heard by now that Whitney Houston has died. And it was a heartbreak, but I said, you know what? What can I do? What can I really say? I don't want to do a bunch of interviews and talk to people and all that. You know, you see that all the time, but really all I can do is really inspire her daughter and her mother, her family, Dion, and these people that I know. And then I remember that Kareem wanted me to come and speak today. And I had sort of a speech all worked out and everything to say, but I decided that I just want to say, just from the heart, what I feel. Excuse me. And that is number one, we are in a time where so many incredible things are happening technologically. And we're in a time where we have a president who has made commitments and has passed bills that really moves the whole point of accessibility for those with disabilities ahead, and believes in making the world accessible to those not just blind or those with low vision or partially sighted, but for all people with any disabilities, because as we know, for us to be living in a time where so many things are possible, it would be a travesty for anyone to block anything that's going to not make this world accessible to everyone. And so I am very excited about that. And I applaud President Obama for that. I applaud the people. And that does span beyond ethnicities, political parties, you know, everyone is committed to that who is committed, but for those who are not committed enough, you need to move out of the way so that we can do what we need to do. I hope to work very closely with the president, just communicating with him, because obviously I can come and sing and do my little thing and song and all that, but you know, it's more important than this. I think that God has given me this ability for a reason. He's using me for a vehicle to do something that's going to help everyone. And so just the name of Stevie Wonder being part of the United Nations as a messenger of peace, well, that's great, but if I can't do anything, if I can't do anything, then it's only a name. And obviously, I was born more than just a name, as we all were. And we cannot allow the fact that we don't have certain physical abilities to stop us from having the vision to seeing that we can and will get all of it in some kind of way. I would like to speak with the president about really encouraging the ability for those, the various movie theaters and movie houses to make closed captioning available, and to make the various films that we all want to see and go and watch accessible with having descriptions so that we can see and know what's going on. Usually we know, but to be without question, we want to know in those quiet places. We all should be able to enjoy the films and have great pleasure in that. And so I want to do everything that I can, work with any technology that I come across, just bring it out here so that we can all enjoy this world and we all live on truly an even platform. It's not impossible. Obviously, we know the great work in the life of Stephen Johnson he did with taking his technology and having the application inside the actual technology itself. That's a great thing. And I would encourage other companies to catch up and do the same thing because it's not impossible. And I would encourage various countries throughout the world to subsidize some of these various things so that all people that are blind or with low vision or partially sighted or those with any disability can have these, because it's a great thing to be able to get on your phone and dial a number without someone asking somebody, well, what is that? And what does that say? Oh, forget about it. You don't want to run your business. And am I wrong or right? And so just to have the freedom of being able to text people, to be able to send emails and get all this information, and to be able to share music with your significant other or with your friend, or your brother, your sister. It's a great thing. And so I think that we all have to do this thing to move technology for those with disabilities on the same level as is for those who are sighted or with all of their physical disabilities. Because even some of those with all the abilities are out of their minds because they're not knowing how to move fast enough. So that's really all I got to say. I thank you all for allowing me to come here. It is truly my pleasure. And
all right, thank you, Mr. Wonder. So, for me, when sometimes people will call me and they'll say, I want to get more involved in the policy. I want to really make a difference. And I can tell you that folks like David, folks like Stevie, folks like Marley Macklin, who couldn't be here today because she's out of the country, but sends her best. And I think we all know Marley, her extraordinary advocacy. So folks like that who are in front of the camera and have a platform are speaking out, not just singing or acting, but are speaking out in favor of policies and really trying to move the ball forward. And that's important, and that helps us all move the ball forward. It helps me in the White House when I can say, well, Stevie would like to come to this ceremony, so maybe we should try to do something about this. So it's beneficial. So with that, let me we're gonna, Dave, are we okay to go for a few more minutes?
He's outside.
He's outside, okay. Yeah. So let's take another question, and we're gonna have to wrap up here pretty soon. But we're gonna try to get to another question or two.
I think the mic went outside with him.
There's a microphone up here. There's a
microphone up here.
There's a cordless phone.
I have a question, and I'm a really loud person, so I'm sure it'll be okay. I just want to ask all of you guys, just broadly, with what I do, I come up against a lot of issues because people don't know that they don't know certain things. I work for a hospice foundation, so we raise money for people on hospice care. And I think the issue is that disability isn't viewed largely or corporally as a civil rights issue the way it should be. And why? It's just a basic question. I really think that if that buzzword hit people more often, like this is a civil rights issue, because since I've been a kid, I've been told what a civil rights issue is. Why isn't that just something that's said more often? Like, this is just basically a civil rights issue. And I mean, I know that that's like a huge like stink bomb to throw in the room, but why isn't that just heard more often? Like, hey, this is a huge problem because these people can't be people like everyone else because they don't have the accessibility.
It's a great question because we're a difficult group to define. African Americans look like African Americans, Caucasians look like Caucasians, old people appear to be old, etc., etc. But people with disabilities fall under such a wide umbrella, from the incredibly able to people that appear fragile and unable to represent themselves. And for so many years, all the images of people with disabilities were provided by the telethons. You know, there was, if you're disabled, or different is what I like to call it, there's always soft piano music or violin music playing underneath you. And it's, you've done such a good job for a little person. How you must have suffered to get where you are. You know, I mean, no, we're in an era and an age, and I think Kareem is a part of this, and we all are, but we're in an era that is a civil rights movement, because we just said, hey, we're at the table, we're not going away, and it's time to, you know what I love? I'm old enough to have been crippled, handicapped, physically challenged, handy-capable, and finally, thank you, Jesus, a person with a disability. You know, what a big deal. That's a big deal.
But I was a kid on a telethon.
Right.
Nobody told me that I had a disability, so I didn't access the resources that I needed. So this, I want to approximate this as a double-edged issue, because it's not just that, you know, look, okay, people in this room obviously have some disabilities. I mean, shocking, you know, but there are a lot of people out there that, first of all, sadly don't want to admit that they have a disability, or the second tier issue is they don't know that they have a disability. They don't know that they can come to a school like this, for example, and say, hey, I have an emotional disability. I mean, it's such a huge spectrum.
You start with the obvious and work your way to the more subtle.
Right, I mean, fair enough, but I mean, it's, yeah, so that's just my favorite.
You gotta make
Can I take a crack at answering?
You have to, for us, I think as an administration, and I think Marcie is probably somebody who can speak to this, but we talk about disability as a civil rights issue all the time. And you won't hear us saying anything other than disability is a civil rights issue. But you have to make it that, and what we try to do is to say, it's okay, it's actually cool to have a disability, and you should be proud of that, and proud of the fact of what you can do. And so that's what we talk about, and I think people have to talk about it that way, and I think it's changed, but it's still got a long way to go.
Yeah.
Just really briefly, first of all, I want to thank you, because I think that was a really important point. Secondly, I want to tell you that I actually have hope on the broad dissemination of civil rights as disability, because more and more I have been looking and hearing about disability being included in coursework in universities and community colleges across the country as a civil rights issue. And so I think that that part is coming. But I think the underpinning is simply this: we must integrate, we must be present, to the extent that it does not violate somebody's concerns about their personal privacy. We have to be in every classroom. We have to be there from the earliest childhood to the last moment, and that's how we become a piece of the fabric of society. So that it's not, as you know, when you meet someone, whether or not you shake hands. The next question is, what do you do? For the disability community, for a long time, that question has been, what can't you do? And so that what we want to do is remove that question, whether it's spoken or unspoken, so that we then are truly equals. And I think that's what all of the civil rights movements are aiming for.
Kareem, I have one comment in some.
I would. Well, hold on. We need to get the microphone, and we're gonna try to take 2 more questions, and then we gotta cut it off. But wait. What's your name? Can we, Betty? We really need to. Can we get another person who hasn't had a chance to ask a question? I want to be respectful and try to get as many people as I can in the last 2 questions. So anybody who hasn't had a chance, let me get to them.
I got one right here. I know she's had her hand raised for a long time.
And we'll get to Dave. We'll get to you next.
Who is it?
Right there, this gentleman.
Oh,
David Wolf.
David.
Hi, I'm David Wolf. I'm Commissioner on Disability for the City of Los Angeles. But let me answer, if I can, this young lady's last question with following up and kind of wrapping up from what I've heard very, very simply by saying that we're all in this together and we've got to make able-bodied people understand, and other disabled people who aren't as committed or can't be in the forefront as we can, that we're all in this together, that we need to provide housing, health, and all the other essentials by giving to each other, by doing what it takes. And what it takes is basically simple acts of kindness that don't require much money. If Kareem didn't have some of this technology, I would be glad to sit there and write for him or to read for him, whereas he could do certain things for me that I can't do. And this is what it takes. What it takes is all of us being together and realizing that we're all Americans and human beings and part of the same planet. And it's not Republican or Democrat. It goes beyond that to showing courtesy, affection, and compassion for one another. And that's where I come from. And when I sit down and speak with the mayor and try to tell the mayor about my constituents' needs, that's what I have to express to him about those people that cannot speak for themselves. And sometimes I would use the word vulnerable, because when you have an autistic child or a person with mental retardation that cannot speak as we can speak, you've got to speak for them, and speak for them with compassion and with caring.
All right, thank you, Dave. Let's take one more question, and then we'll have closing comments.
Well, what happened, Dick? Who's been waiting the longest? You have. She has. I guarantee you she has.
Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Susan Misner. I'm with the Mayor's Office on Disability in San Francisco, and I want to echo the thanks. I also want to just admit that, Mr. Hall, I may be the only person in this room who's never met you or knows about you. But I love what you had to say, so thank you.
My wife hates the show. She would rather watch HGTV or The Real Housewives of Peoria.
This is one of the disabilities of a chronic illness. I don't have time to watch TV. I go to work and I go to sleep. I have no life. But I want to just repeat some of the thanks to Kareem and the administration and all of you for the outreach that you've been doing. We were talking beforehand, and there is just no other administration that has done the outreach and made the effort to connect with those of us working in the grassroots, in the community, as much as this administration, and it's been fabulous.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
And I have a couple of follow-up things. I appreciate Mr. Wolf, saying that we all need to be helping each other, and certainly in the shelters after disaster, if we don't have funding for personal assistance services, I hope we are all helping each other. But helping each other isn't going to build us curb ramps. And I guess the one really concrete, so to speak, question that I have for Richard is, in San Francisco, we get hundreds of millions of dollars for the Central Subway, which is a 2-mile underground piece of the city that we already have surface transportation for. And we've lost virtually all federal funding for curb ramps and sidewalks. And I'd like to know how we can help you to get the reprioritizing when we have scarce resources. How do we reprioritize those resources so that they go to the civil rights issues? So that we do prioritize civil rights and safety, which is how we do it in San Francisco, is our capital dollars go first to safety and then to civil rights issues.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Part of what we've been trying to do since I've been there is move the focus to understand that when you're doing any project and when you're looking at civil projects or projects around public rights of way or transportation, that you ensure within the project that the accessibility stuff is a part of it. I know, what I'll say to you is that didn't exist. When I got into DOT, that kind of stuff did not exist within projects. If you looked at a budget and you asked what are you doing in terms of addressing the accessibility and increasing accessibility, you couldn't answer the question. It didn't exist.
That's what the law already says.
Correct. The law may say that, but what you have to do within these projects is to ensure that the way they're budgeting and the way they're, as you said, setting the priorities, that you're ensuring that the accessibility piece is addressed, but also that it's going above and beyond what the general regulations state. As we have consistently said, and I've mentioned to you about the rail car issue, they wanted to do only what the regulations state. And we said absolutely not. We want to go above and beyond what regulations state because we're not achieving access based on what the regulations are currently stating. And these are the things that we need to do. So it's getting in there and it's hunkering down on some of those issues. I mean, for me to sit there and say to you that we're going to have additional extra funding to just go do disability, accessibility stuff isn't the reality right now. And the reality is we have to ensure that the projects that are being done, that it is prioritized and that we see within the budget that those things are actually going to happen.
But we're also, in addition to that, Richard and I are working pretty closely on, because I think it's also a civil rights and an enforcement issue as well. And Richard and I have some things in the pipeline that are hopefully going to look at making sure that we're reprioritizing civil rights and enforcement from a transportation perspective. And so pretty soon you'll be seeing some announcements on that as we finalize what we're doing around civil rights and enforcement, because I think it's an issue that has been brought to the White House's attention, it's been brought to Richard's attention, and Richard and I sat down, and I think we have commitments from the leadership of the Department of Transportation that we're going to make some strides around enforcement of civil rights in the transportation context as well as others. So kind of stay tuned for that. So let me wrap up with some comments, and I'll let our agencies wrap up with any comments. I want to wrap up with my comment. I want to go back to something that David said from the beginning, just because it's my boss, the president, and so I want to make sure that I'm speaking on his behalf. David talked about the State of the Union and not hearing the phrase "people with disabilities," and it's true that in this State of the Union, people with disabilities, that phrase was not mentioned. And listen, I certainly wish that it had been mentioned. And the State of the Union is an extraordinarily complicated speech. It's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts, trying to make sure that we get that type of mention in. It didn't happen. But, you know, as I told David when he first raised this to me, I guess two things I would say. I am interested in an administration and a president that beyond saying things is doing things.
You bet.
And if you don't say it sometimes, your actions speak louder than your words. And I think that our actions speak pretty loudly about what this president thinks about disability and the landmark things that he's done that no other administration has done, from putting people to myriad of things. But the second thing I'll say, and the last thing that I'll say, is that we say it. The president says it more than any other president, I think, in history. And you know, you can look back at the speeches, you can look back at what you want to, but last year's State of the Union included people with disabilities. November 4th, 2008, his acceptance speech on the night he won the election included people with disabilities. Just the other day, when he gave a speech about waivers in education, a huge announcement, included students with disabilities. And, you know, tons of speeches, if you go back through the president's speeches, major speeches included people with disabilities. The Kansas speech that was based on, that the State of the Union was largely based on, included people with disabilities. So go back and look at this president's speeches. I guarantee you that his inclusion of people with disabilities in most of his speeches is far greater than we've ever seen from any president. So,
Kareem, I must have touched a nerve. I'm sorry.
He's my president.
He's my president too, and
absolutely.
And I have to say, I don't want to give Kareem a bigger head than he deserves to have, but probably the singular honor of my life was being asked to introduce the president for the 20th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act at the White House. Kareem had a lot to do with that, and this president has done more. Gosh, maybe I'm greedy. I want more still. You know? I want this digital revolution to kick in for people with disabilities. I'm thrilled that President Obama was the first president to make use of the internet and emails and tweeting and everything else. I mean, this is an incredible sea change that we've been going through just in this administration alone. So I'm proud to know you, Kareem, and I'm especially proud that President Obama understands this. I always want to push a little bit. That's just in my nature.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's let Marcie, then Richard, and Danny, and we'll close.
I am convinced that we can continue to make significant progress that will have a sweeping effect on every person in this country, and frankly, the 1 billion people with disabilities around the world, and our families and our friends. We have got to stick together. We've got to hang tough. We've got to not settle. These are civil rights issues. We need to make sure that we never give up, never give in. We need to keep moving forward, and I am absolutely convinced that the work that this administration has done, is doing, and will continue to do, if given the opportunity, is going to have a lasting effect for our children and for the future.
Lead on.
Richard?
I would second that, and just saying that, you know, my commitment when I take this job is that 20 years from now we can look back and know that the policy changes that we've made has made a difference. In transportation, you don't always see change immediately, but hopefully as we look down the road, we've seen those changes that need to occur.
Thank you. Danny?
Thank you. Just in concluding, you know, I think Greedy is great. I think it is wonderful that we all want this and we want more, and that we're working together for that. I know that the reason I'm here today is because the President spoke to me, to all of us personally, on the night he was elected, when he said that opportunities were going to be afforded to all of us, including disabled Americans. So I'm grateful to Kareem, I'm grateful to all of you for your interest and for partnering with us and sharing your experiences. And I hope that we'll be able to get together and do this more and soon. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.